George Whitmore was 81 years old when the silence became unbearable. For 6 decades, his world had been built around sound, not noise, but music. The sound of hammers striking ivory, of strings vibrating like the veins of his soul. He had spent a lifetime teaching, composing, playing. His hands had shaped melodies that had filled halls, churches, and wedding aisles. And then, in a single cruel winter, his right hand betrayed him. The stroke had come quietly, like a thief. One morning he woke, reached for his coffee, and watched the cup tremble and fall. The sound of it shattering on the tile was the last perfect note he remembered. After that, silence became his constant companion. The doctors called him lucky. He could walk, he could speak, but they didn't understand what it meant to lose the music. For a pianist, silence wasn't peace, it was exile. His house at the edge of Portland sat beneath a sycamore tree that dropped leaves like slow tears. The piano, a black Steinway upright, its finish worn and keys yellowed, stood by the window, the same place his late wife, Helen, had loved to sit and listen as he played. Every morning he made the same ritual, tea for 2, though there was only 1 cup needed. He'd place the other across from him anyway, a silent promise to the woman he had loved for 57 years. Then he would sit at the piano, press a key with his left hand, and listen. Sometimes the sound came pure, sometimes the string buzzed, sometimes it didn't sound at all. He tried not to think of that as a metaphor. Then one March afternoon, as rain whispered against the glass, George heard something new. Laughter. Not the TV, not a neighbor, but a child's laughter, bright and close. He looked up to see a boy standing on the sidewalk, soaked to the skin, staring at the piano through the window. The boy's shoes were untied, his hair plastered to his forehead. But he was smiling, wide and unafraid. George opened the door. "You'll catch your death out there, boy," he said, his voice rough but kind. The boy grinned. "I thought someone was playing." George chuckled softly. "Not for a long time, son." The boy's name was Leo, 10 years old, curious, restless, the kind of child who sees stories in everything. He lived down the hill in a small apartment with his mother, no father, no piano. "I like music," Leo said, "but we don't have one. I play on the table at home." He mimed hitting invisible keys, his little fingers dancing in the air. Something stirred in George's chest, a soundless echo of recognition. "Come in," he said. "Let's see if this old piano still remembers what joy sounds like." That first afternoon they sat together, an old man and a boy, separated by 70 years and united by the same quiet hunger. George showed him middle C, then D. Then Leo missed every third note, laughed at every mistake, and asked 1,000 questions. When the boy left, George found himself humming. And just like that, one afternoon turned into many. Every day after school, Leo came running up the hill, backpack bouncing, rain, sun, or wind. It didn't matter. He'd knock twice and shout through the door, "Mr. Whitmore, can we play today?" And every day, George would say, "Music doesn't wait, Leo, come in." They played for hours. Some days were lessons, some were stories. George told him about the time he played for Helen at their wedding. The song he'd written just for her, Rainlight. She said it sounded like sunlight caught in a raindrop. He smiled. "And maybe that's what love is, Leo. Light that refuses to go out, even in the storm." The boy listened as if the world depended on every word. As the months passed, the tremor in George's hand began to fade. Not completely, but enough for him to play again. Slow, tender melodies, full of breath and emotion. Leo clapped every time. "Mr. Whitmore," he'd say, "that was perfect." George would smile. "No, my boy, but it was alive, that's better." One morning in August, George received a letter. The handwriting was neat, careful, distant. "Dad, I heard from a neighbor that you've been teaching piano again. I'm glad you're staying busy. I might visit next month. Mark, his only son. They hadn't spoken in 3 years since the argument about Helen's medical bills. Mark had called him stubborn. George had called him heartless. Both had been right in their own way. The visit came on a Sunday. Mark stood in the doorway wearing a suit, holding a phone that buzzed every minute. "You look older," he said awkwardly. George chuckled. "You don't. You look like a man allergic to sunlight." Mark didn't laugh. He looked around the small, cluttered living room, his gaze landing on the piano. "You still have that old thing. Still plays better than most people talk," George replied. Then, as if summoned by fate, there was a knock at the door. Leo burst in, full of energy and sunshine. "Mr. Whitmore, I finished the piece." He froze when he saw Mark. "Oh, sorry, I didn't know you had company." "It's all right," George said gently. "This is my son. Mark, this is Leo." Leo gave a small wave. "Nice to meet you, sir." Mark nodded stiffly. "You're taking lessons?" "Kind of," Leo said. "But mostly we just play." And he did, right then and there. He sat at the piano and began the melody George had taught him. Rainlight. It wasn't perfect. The rhythm wobbled. The tempo faltered. But it had heart. Pure, unfiltered emotion. George joined in, left hand steady, right hand trembling but determined. The notes filled the room, echoing against the framed photos of Helen, against the past itself. When the last note faded, Mark's eyes glistened. "I didn't know you still played," he said softly. "I didn't either," George replied. "Not until he reminded me." That night, Mark stayed for dinner. They ate stew and bread and spoke about nothing important, which for them was everything. Autumn came with gold leaves and the smell of wood smoke. George's hands grew weaker but his heart stronger. He played slower now, often letting Leo take over while he listened. "You don't need me much anymore," he teased. Leo grinned. "Yes, I do. Who else is going to tell me when I rush the tempo?" George laughed. "Fair enough." By Christmas, Mark had started visiting regularly. He'd bring groceries, fix the leaky roof, sometimes even play a few chords. Badly, but with effort. One evening, he brought something special, a framed photo of Helen, restored from an old negative. "I found this in a box," he said quietly. "Thought you might want it near the piano." George ran his fingers over the glass. "She'd like that," he whispered. In late spring, George fell ill. The doctors said it was nothing serious, but the fatigue lingered. Leo came every day, bringing flowers from his mother's garden. "Mr. Whitmore," he said one afternoon, "you should rest. I'll play for you today." George smiled faintly. "Then play Rainlight for her." "For who?" "For Helen. She's probably listening." Leo sat down and began to play. The notes floated through the air, pure and golden. George closed his eyes. He could almost hear Helen humming along. That night, he passed peacefully in his sleep. The faint scent of rain in the room, the piano still warm from the last song. At the funeral, people came from across town. Former students, old friends, nurses from the hospital where he once played in the lobby on Christmas Eve. But the one who spoke was Leo. He stood at the front, hands trembling. "Mr. Whitmore taught me that music isn't about how perfect your hands are. It's about how open your heart is. He said that when you love something enough, it finds a way to keep singing, even after you're gone." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Mark approached Leo afterward, resting a hand on his shoulder. "He really cared about you," he said. Leo smiled through tears. He cared about everyone. He just needed someone to listen. Mark nodded. For the first time in years, he felt proud, not just of his father, but of being his son. 15 years passed. The small brick house was sold, but the piano remained, donated to the local community center. It stood in the music room, its wood polished, its keys worn smooth from countless hands. Above it hung a brass plaque that read, George Whitmore, he taught us that silence is never the end. Every Thursday, a music class filled the room, and leading it was Leo, now grown, now a teacher. Sometimes when the children struggled with a difficult piece, he would smile and say, "There is no such thing as a wrong note, only one you haven't learned to love yet." On rainy days, he'd tell them about an old man who played through his pain, who made tea for two even when there was one, who taught him that love and music are the same. They don't die, they echo. And when he played Rainlight at the end of class, he could swear he felt a soft warmth beside him, as if someone, somewhere, was still keeping time. He lost his sound, but found his song. And maybe that's what victory really is, not getting everything back, but finding peace with what still sings.